Hello, my name is Panos, and today I'm gonna be showing you how you can actually use the new Unity input system and how you can actually port your old games to use it and not waste any more time trying to have clunky code and actually changing the keybinds with the ease of a click. So for this video we're gonna be using the car controller project, which I've been working on for quite a few videos now. And we're gonna be porting it to use the new input system. And so if you have any question on how any code works, you can go to the GitHub and look at the code, or you can ask any question you want into the Discord in the link below. Alright, so what we're gonna be doing first is installing the actual input system from Unity. So we're gonna go into Window, Package Manager, and here we're gonna search input, and we're gonna go into this drop down that says packages, and we're gonna go into Unity registry. So as you can see here, there is the input system, so we can press install into this. So next thing we're gonna be doing is actually creating the asset that we're gonna keep track of what input actions we want. So to do this, we go into create, and we go all the way down here that has input actions. So we click this, and we name this car input, for example. Okay, so as you can see, there is this menu here, so we click edit asset, and it pops up this menu. So what we're gonna be doing here is actually pressing the plus icon here, and we're gonna name this as car. And we're gonna go into actions, we're gonna delete this one, and we're gonna press the plus sign, and we're gonna call this throttle, for example. What we're gonna be doing, deleting this no binding as well, is pressing the plus button, and basically here we choose what kind of button we want. So here we want a button that's either positive or negative for brake. So to do this, we put a name as keyboard, and here we choose the binding for negative and the binding for positive. For the negative binding, we would like to use something like the S on our keyboard or the down arrow. So we're gonna go into here and we're gonna search S and keyboard. So here's the S, and we click it. We do the same thing for positive. We press W, and now we can actually create a new binding, positive and negative, and we can actually name this keyboard arrows. And this time we're gonna have the up arrow and the down arrow. And we can actually do this exact same thing for the steering. So we press the upper plus icon, we call this steering, and now we go into positive and negative. We call this A, D, for example, for A for left and D for right. We press A for keyboard, D for keyboard, and same thing for left and right. So arrows, left on the keyboard, left arrow, and right arrow. Perfect. Another thing we want to keep track of is our clutch and our handbrake. So we're gonna create a button for that as well. So here we have the button for handbrake, but this time we don't need the 1D access. So we're gonna just go into the no binding and press the key that we want. So for the handbrake, it's gonna be space, and for the clutch, it's gonna be, wait, let me write this correctly. And for the clutch, it's going to be the shift. So we go here, we search for shift on the keyboard, and we're perfect. So now what we're gonna do is press save asset. We're gonna close it, and we're gonna go here and create the generate C# class, and we're gonna click apply. As you can see here, it's off screen. Wait, let me move this. So as you can see here, a new input C# script has been created, which is basically the handler for our script. So what we want to do now is create a new script that's gonna handle the input system. So we're gonna create a new script. We're gonna go here, and we're gonna call this player input, player car input, for example. And it's gonna be, and we're gonna go and open it. And let me close this. Okay. Okay, so what we want to do now is actually reference the Unity input controller. So we're gonna be, say, using Unity engine on top of our script dot input system. Perfect. After we do this, we're gonna go to void start. We're gonna change this to awake so that it starts before anything else. And we're also gonna create a floating point for our throttle input so that we can check it. A float for our steering input. Our clutch, wait, if I read this correctly. And our handbrake. After this, we want to actually reference our input script, the one that we created here, this here input script. So when we reference this into Visual Studio, we go like this. So we go as our input. Oh wait, we need to actually create this as a member of our class. So this is gonna be a public input, which we're gonna call input. And so input is gonna be equal to a new what was it? Car input. Perfect. Okay, so my bad, it's not input, it's car input here. And we're good. So what we're gonna do after is create a new function, which is gonna be called onEnable. And so basically, whenever this object gets enabled, it will send out the input system to actually handle our script's functions to it. And we want to do the exact same thing for when we disable. So we're gonna say void onDisable. And now we want to actually enable our input system, so we're gonna go to input.enable and disable accordingly. Perfect. After we do this, we want to have a function for each key so that we can handle each input separately. So what we're gonna have is a void that's gonna actually handle our throttle, our steering, our clutch, and our handbrake. So we just say private void apply throttle, for example. And what we're gonna reference here is the input dot callback action. Sorry, it's input action dot callback function, or not callback context. Yep. And we're gonna set this as value. So what this is gonna do is gonna take a value that's gonna be an input, and we're gonna actually set our throttle to that value. So we set our throttle input to be equal to the value, but we're gonna assess this as a float. So we're gonna read the value as a float, and we're gonna be okay with that. And we're gonna do the same exact value, function, for when we release the throttle. But this time, wait, let me just copy paste this. But this time, instead of getting the value, we're just gonna set the throttle input to 0. Alright, so right now we have a function for throttle, or apply throttle and release throttle. To actually set our input to use this function, we're gonna go to input and throttle. Wait, throttle. I'm not sure. Oh, so it's input.car, since when we go here, wait, this is gonna be weird. So when we go here, we have our action map, that's the car. We can have different actions, for example, if you have a different player, a different controller, or, you know, different actions in general. So in this case, our action is called car, and our throttle is the actual action that we're gonna be using for when we apply throttle. So when this is performed, we're gonna apply the throttle. And we're gonna do the exact same thing, but when it's disabled. So on cancelled, and we're gonna release the throttle. And so what we do now is doing the exact same thing for all 4. So we start with steering again, so we just copy paste this. And we go steering. steering again, and we're gonna copy paste this, and we're gonna go apply steering and release steering again. And here we go, apply steering and release steering. Perfect. And we go on to clutch as well. And and so now, if we close the script and we go into our car, we can actually set let me close this so it doesn't start working. So we can just set our car input script. Wait, sorry, not our car input, the player car input script. And we're gonna see the actual throttle input and output, and steering and clutch, etc. So as you can see here, when I press the up arrow, it doesn't. Okay, so it doesn't work because I made a mistake. Instead of on enable, I put this on disable. So we go into on enable and actually set this. And so let's try it again. So we go into our car and we look at these values right here. And so when we press left, you can see the steering is 1. When I press forward, the throttle is 1. If I press shift, the steering is 1. And if I, yeah, okay, I think I forgot the, yeah. So here, instead of apply steering on the clutch, we go apply clutch as well. Oops. And release clutch accordingly. And for the 100 something. Okay, that's it. So we go into our car again. And we can see if I press space, the handbrake input is 1. If I press clutch, the clutch input is 1. But these values all on their own, they're not very useful. What we need to do is actually send them to our car controller script. So we go back into our car controller script, and we want to find whenever we use the old input system. So here we've got, as you can see, the input get axis for vertical and horizontal, and we also got the input get key code left, and the same thing for handbrake. So what we're gonna be doing is creating a new function, or just modifying this one. So we can set this as set input. It's gonna take, let's set this as public first of all. It's gonna take a float, which is gonna be our throttle input. Another float, which is gonna be our steering input, our clutch input, and our handbrake input, yeah. After this, we just remove the old function that updated our input. And we want to change this, so whenever we use input.getAxis to actually use our throttle, our steering, our clutch, and our handbrake. So here that we have our gas input, instead of axis, of this axis, we're gonna be using our throttle.in. And same thing, and we just remove the buttons, we don't need them for now. These are the mobile buttons that I made on an earlier video. And same thing for the steering. Not steering input, steering in. And for the clutch. And for our handbrake. Perfect, so let's try this. Okay, before we try this, on an old video I used to use the handbrake as a boolean function. So to actually use it on the same way, we can actually just say that if the handbrake is bigger than 0.5, for example, then the handbrake is actually engaged, and if it's not, it's not. So now that we have our actual input, we go back to our car controller, and as you can see, we made this function public. So that means that we can actually access it from our player.car input. So we go into our void.update, and we access our car controller's function through here. So what we're gonna be doing is having a car controller variable, so our car controller, And since this is always gonna be used alongside our car controller, we can require it. So require component.type of and car controller. And so here, first of all on the awake, we go car controller equals get component the car controller. So we get the component of the car controller. I've said this way too many times in single sentence. Okay, so we go into our car controller dot set input, and we set our input. So throttle in, steering in, clutch in, put. Yep, so it's input instead of in. And handbrake input. And now we try it while we play. Okay, so let's see how this works. So I press left, right, it seems to work if you can see here. And also it seems to start going. Okay, so the clutch is should be the way, so I need to press the clutch for it to work. Okay, so yeah, this works. Although, if you can see here, the steering is pretty weird, so let me actually fix the clutch real quick. So we go back into our car controller, and instead of bigger, it should be smaller. And let's see how this plays out. Let me show you what's going on with the input right now, and why it looks weird. Let me also go into the car. Okay, so as you can see here on the steering input, you can see that it goes from 1 to -1 real quickly. And obviously this is not something that you would want while playing a game. So let's fix this. The way this used to work in the old input system was that you would get the axis, for example horizontal or vertical, and it would dampen the input. And so we're gonna be doing the exact same thing but script-wise. And we're not gonna be depending on Unity to do that for us. So we go back into our Visual Studio, our player car inputs, and we're gonna be creating a new function which we're gonna call, which is gonna return a float, and we're gonna call this dampened input. It's gonna take a float, which is gonna be the input of our function, and the output that we want. And what's gonna be doing is actually returning the math function, the lerp, of basically the output. Sorry if I do this really. The output and the input. And so it's gonna make it so that it gets closer and closer to the input the more time it passes. So it's gonna be, the speed is gonna be the time, delta time, times our speed, our dampen speed, which we do not have a variable for it yet, so we're gonna just create one. We're gonna go into our variables, we're gonna create a public float, which we're gonna call dampen speed. And so why is this input though? Okay, so input. And so now we want to have a double variable for whichever variable we want to dampen. So our steering and our throttle, we're gonna have a throttle input and a throttle. Let's make this public so that we can actually see it. And our throttle dampened. Same thing for our steering. So public float dampened. And what we're gonna be doing on update is setting our throttle input. Oh, we can actually do this for the clutch as well. So let's public float clutch dump. Okay, so our throttle input, our throttle dampened is gonna be equal to the dampened input with our throttle input and our throttle dump. We're gonna do the same thing for our steering and our clutch. So steering dampened, steering input, steering dampened, and same thing for our clutch. Clutch dump is gonna be equal to clutch dot input and clutch dot output. And instead of our throttle input, we're gonna use the throttle dampened, the steering dampened, and our clutch dampened. So let's see how this works now. So let's see, I press left, it goes super slow, so we're gonna need to change the actual speed of it. So we're gonna go into our car, and here that we have a dampened speed, let's make this as 5, let's see how this goes. Ah, this is a lot better, yeah. So let's keep this at 5. So we go forward, so the clutch still not intact. What is going on? Okay, I think this is a bugged out clutch. So let's say let's make this. So yeah, so this is, we instead of handbrake, instead of clutch, we made it handbrake. So this should be the exact opposite of this. So 1 minus, and then the absolute of this. Okay, so actually, yeah. When we have the clutch engaged, we need the clutch to be 1, and if it's disengaged, we want it to be 0. And the way our script works is, if we're pressing the clutch button, it's 1, and if we're not pressing it, it's 0. So what we're doing now is reversing it. So if it's 1, we want it to be 0, and if it's 0, we want it to be 1. Okay, so let's try this. We go into our car, we change the speed since we forgot to do that. We put it to as the dampened speed to be equal to 5, and let's see how this works now. Okay, so it works, it goes forward, it brakes, which is very good, and it steers. So yeah, let's see if the handbrake works. Yep, the handbrake works. And does the clutch work? Wait, let's see. Let me brake. And the handbrake, the clutch works as well. So this is it for the tutorial then. Thanks for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed the video.